before we get carried away and start assembling this thing, because you know that's going to be pretty in-depth, let's go ahead and do something that's pretty important and you don't want to forget. So the first thing is our voltage selection there in the back. Depending on where you live, you're going to switch that either to 115 or 220, and you guys can see that ours is switched to 115, so we don't have to do anything. So make sure you check that before you forget, because if you don't switch that to your voltage, you could damage the printer. So the next thing we want to do is we want to check our frame, and what I mean by that is that if we put the printer down, we can see we have wobbling back and forth. So what this means is that the frame is not sitting straight. So no matter how I put it, I still move around quite a bit. It wasn't assembled straight on a flat desk. So make sure you have a flat surface before you do this, wherever that is. And what we're going to do is going to grab the larger wrench that was provided, and we're going to loosen these bolts on the sides. There's 4 of them. Surprisingly, they were already pretty loose. So this is going to release the frame where it can bend in the right shape, I guess. So now you guys can see we don't have that wobble anymore. We just untightened the bolts and it kind of fell into where it needs to be. So all we got to do now is retighten them. And so this is a pretty important step, because you don't want to, you know, have the printer all built out and then be doing this later. And you know, make sure you snug these all up. Even if your printer is not crooked and already nice and level, you need to go back and check all these bolts and make sure they're tight enough, because most of the time they get loosened over time. And get them pretty snug, but don't over tighten them. Be careful with that. We do have 4 of them, so we have pretty good clamping force there. All right, and we're gonna do the same thing on this side. Make sure that it's still level, and then we'll snug these all the way up also. All right, and so we're good now. So after this, go ahead and flip over the printer. Under here, what we need to do is we need to check the bolts here in the middle, which hold the Y-axis rail. You want to make sure these are nice and snug, and mine were too loose. And you want to snug these up pretty good, because this is the main point where the Y-axis is held at. You want to make sure that doesn't move while you're printing. So we're going to snug these up pretty good. And that's it. That's our main frame bolts for the bottom rails that hold kind of the whole structure together. Now while we're under here, you guys can see we got really nice, big, large, squishy rubber feet on 4 corners. So I'd love to see that. That's going to minimize the vibrations that's coming from the printer, which will help with noise. So let's flip this thing back around. Check again, make sure nothing's wobbling and it's straight. So if you do have wobble, go back and fix it, because you don't want to have any kind of play in the frame. So another thing that's good to adjust before you assemble it all together, because it's easier to reach, is the bed here. And because we don't have our frame still built, we have really good access through the side. So if we look underneath, we can see there's some rollers there, and also you can see kind of maybe the eccentric nuts, and that's what adjusts the roller farther and closer away from the frame. And we got 4 rollers, 2 on this side and 2 on the other, and they go around the frame. So these are adjustable and these are just stationary. So we're going to grab this open-ended wrench and we'll be able to turn our eccentric nut with it. Now before we do that, we need to check it. So what I'm going to do is go underneath and kind of spin the rollers. There's a little wobble. If you guys maybe can see that, it does move around. But this one here is perfect, and that one needs to be tightened up just a little bit. So the idea here is that you want that little roller, you want it to kind of like spin in one spot. So you want to grab your hand under there and spin it. So I'm actually spinning the roller. So if you can't spin it, that means it's too tight. And if it's too loose, you're going to have a lot of wobble in the bed. So to tighten it or loosen it, we're just going to put our wrench on the eccentric nut and then turn it one way or another to tighten it or loosen it. All right, so I turned it a little, and that's actually perfect. So right now I can spin the roller with my finger, so that tells me that it's not too tight. So if you can't spin the roller with your finger just in one spot, kind of like doing a little burnout, that means you're too tight. But if you're too loose, you're obviously going to see the wobble. So the idea here is to get it just tight enough where it doesn't wobble. And this is what we got here, and you're going to have a really nice smooth operation. This is quite important for getting the best print quality out of the printer, is to adjust all these things correctly. So, and hopefully that made sense. You guys can see here on the hot end we have the same situation. We got 2 stationaries and 1 adjustable down here, and we're going to do the same thing later on. We're going to adjust this roller to go up or down to get closer or farther away. So yeah, pretty simple once you understand how it works. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our first step, which is going to be installing the Z-axis profiles. So we're going to need 2 channels and 4 bolts that will go underneath. So here we have the channels. Let's go ahead and unpack them, I guess. Yeah, you guys can see our Z-axis switch is already on here. Go ahead and pull out our lead screw, put it to the side. Be careful with the sharp edges on the ends. And the other channel is just clean with nothing on it. And they're going to go on each side of the printer. The one with the end stop switch will go here. We can see the plug to it on the left side. But before we do that, let's find our bolts, which are in this bag. And there's little packets that are labeled, and the one we're looking for is called M545s. Little letters on the packets that says what they are. So All right, so let's start with this one here with the limit switch, and it's simply going to go like this. So our bolts are going to go underneath from the bottom up, and you guys can see them sticking out right here. We'll go ahead and put both of them through. We'll grab our channel, line it up, and we can go ahead and start it with our hands. So however it is easier for you to, you know, do this, you can go completely sideways or maybe even prop up the printer like with this spool here. So it kind of helps you hold it. But yeah, we're essentially just going to start the bolts and run them down. We'll grab our wrench. We are going to need to go a little higher here. Now it's quite important that you don't tighten this yet. So just run them down is all we're doing. And the reason you don't want to tighten it is because we, you know, still have to assemble everything, and we want this thing to move around, you know, and naturally kind of go where it wants to go. But yeah, same thing for this side. And on this channel, it doesn't really matter which is the top or the bottom. It's exactly the same, looks like. So we'll grab our bolts and channel and go ahead and run them up. And I actually do include an extra bolt just in case you need it. And now we have both of our Z-axis channels on. All right, so for step 2, we're going to be installing the lead screw into the motor and then installing that into the printer. So we're going to need 2 bolts, which are M420, and these are in their own separate pack. So let's grab the motor and the lead screw, and we'll put the lead screw inside the coupler, just like that. You can push it all the way down, but I recommend lifting it up just a tiny bit. I mean, just a hair. That way the lead screw doesn't touch the motor shaft, because there is a potential it could make noise. Now we're going to grab an Allen wrench and tighten this bolt on the top to clamp it together so the lead screw doesn't come out. And we can check the bottom bolt too, make sure it's tight. Pretty simple here. And it looks like we're really straight. I'm spinning it. So that's great. And also, if you want to make sure your lead screw is straight, you can grab it before you install it and just roll it on the table and see if it wobbles around. That'll tell you if it's straight or not. I mean, if it does have a little bit of wobble, that's okay, as long as it's nothing severe. But you know, they should be pretty straight. So, and if you guys can see this bracket back here, this is where our bolts will go through the front here, and they kind of barely fit in there, so you have to kind of force them in, as it's really tight. And then this part here will screw into our channel, which is going to be the same side where the end stop switch is. Flip the printer around. You guys can see there's a couple threads there through the channel, and that's where the bolts will go. So we do need to raise it a bit so it can line up, and then we're going to tighten it up. So this bracket here, the way it mounts, it's pretty secure where it needs to be, but it still does move around quite a bit. So you guys can probably see how much the lead screw moves on the top. So what you want to do is you want to line it up. If I could show you guys maybe. Try to get the whole side here. But yeah, if you can see the lead screw in the channel. So the channel is not tight yet. But since this thing does mount on the channel, what's important is that your lead screw here is not offset to one side. So if I do this, you guys can see, you know, that's obviously not okay. You know, if you're even a little off, that can put strain into your lead screw. So basically what you want to do is just line it up straight as possible to the channel and then tighten those little bolts up. And we should be good right there. Now another thing that you might want to check, and you don't really have adjustment on this, but yeah, if you can see here, you want this to be, you know, as close as possible to having the same gap, but it's a little bit off. If I spin the lead screw, you can see it does have a little bit of play. It's very tiny, so I would say this is pretty much perfect. But yeah, I mean, this part, you know, if you want to absolutely get this perfect, you'll have to adjust something down here, like shimmy the top, or better yet, there are tiny little bolts on top here that you can loosen, which will, you know, let you give play back and forth. So, but from my experience, this is pretty close to, you know, where it needs to be. So just a little bit, you know, doesn't make a huge difference there. So, and plus the higher it goes, you know, the more leverage you'll have to push this back a little bit. So yeah, not a big deal, but you know, if you want to be perfectionist, you can adjust that. All right, well, hopefully we're not going in too much detail here. So for step 3, we're going to be building out the X-axis assembly with, you know, all the parts on it. So we can move the printer to the side for now, and we're going to need to grab the X-axis channel, and that's going to be the one with a bunch of holes, and also it's longer. So if you guys see the 2 smaller channels, one of them is longer, that's the one we need. And the sticker here says X-axis profile. So this might get a little more complicated because we do have a lot of holes and wallowed out places, and yeah, you're just gonna have to pay a little more attention in this steps here. But believe it or not, guys, it's not that hard. So these are all the things we're gonna need. The main extruder assembly, a coupler, which it does come with 2, but we just need 1, I think. 2 M514 bolts, and this wrench here. So let's first go ahead and grab the little coupler and we'll install it onto the extruder mechanism. So literally just And then we're going to take our wrench and just tighten it up. So, but be careful not to make this tight. Just snug it up a little bit and that's it. You don't want to over tighten that. So yeah, as simple as that. We got that on there. All right, so for the next part, we're going to have to connect this piece to the channel, and it's actually not too hard. It's just a little bit maybe confusing because, you know, you got a bunch of holes everywhere. The way you know you're doing it right is that if you guys see this bolt here, this bolt is actually going to fall into one of these wallowed out spots. It actually looks like it's symmetrical maybe. So maybe it could go on either end is what it looks like. Just kind of interesting. If they designed it that way, that's actually a lot easier to figure out. You're just going to simply grab the wallowed out part and set it over this bolt. And then you got a hole here that will line up with the threads on the channel, which a bolt will go through the other end here. But yeah, through there, the bolt will go into here. And I'm gonna go ahead and check the other side to confirm. And yeah, sure enough, guys, it doesn't matter which side you use. Either side lines up, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, one of our bolts are gonna go in there, and then the other one actually goes up here on the front next to that. So yeah, again, if you guys can see that, pretty simple. Put it together. And then bolt here and a bolt here. In any case, guys, you can kind of see here maybe how it goes together. But yeah, we can go ahead and snug that up. So this does move on the channel back and forth. So kind of line everything up, sort of center and tighten it there. So, all right. And that is our step 3, guys. So making pretty good progress. So here we have step 4, which involves kind of a lot of things here, which we need to slide in the hot end and then also install the end bracket. And at the same time, also put the belt on. It's not as bad as it looks. So we're gonna also need one more of these bolts that we just used, which is the M514, our end bracket, and also our belt. All right, so we got all of our parts here. Yeah, so you wanna grab your hot end facing up, which is like this. The main thing here is that to make sure that all your cables going to the printer that are tethered to the hot end are not, you know, like all twisted in funny ways. So you wanna make sure it's pretty loose and happy where it's sitting like this. So if we grab what we just built and we grab our hot end with the nozzle pointing down and our wires not being tangled, roll the hot end literally on the rail here. And just like that. Now, before you roll this on, it's probably a better idea, so we're gonna roll it off, to go ahead and set our belt down into the channel with the teeth pointing down and kind of set it in the channel. So about, you know, half of it on each side. And that's kind of gonna drop in there. So yeah, once you got your belt on, we're gonna grab the hot end and we're literally just gonna roll it on there on top of the belt. So yeah, it's not too hard. It seems complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. And so after this, we're gonna install the bracket at this end. And it's this guy here. So if you guys see, there's 2 nuts and then a bolt here. And this bolt here will go on the back side of this channel where the other wallowed out part was. And it's literally gonna line up right here like this. And there's 2 bolts that go here. So I think they only want us to put this one on this side, and the reason for that because we have a tensioner bracket on the other end. So again, here you want to line it up as straight as possible and then snug it up. So, but yeah, simple as that, guys. You can see that all of our pieces are on. The hot end's on, the belt's going around, and our bracket here at the end. All right, so for step 5, we also got quite a few parts here to install. So we're gonna install the tensioner for the belt. We're gonna actually connect the belt to the hot end. And we're also gonna install the end cap for the X-axis limit switch. So let's go ahead and grab that. And you guys can see that it has the switch already in it installed. We got the tensioner here. And you guys can see the bearing inside. And then this is how we're gonna loosen and tighten it. So we're gonna need 2 more M514 bolts and 2 M48 bolts, which are actually in this spare baggie. They're not labeled, but according to the picture in the manual, this is what they look like. So, all right, so we got everything we need. So first things first, let's go ahead and install this tensioner. So what we need to do first is unscrew the nut here completely. And this is probably the easiest way to do it. So once that's out, we can go ahead and drop the whole mechanism out. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna feed our belt through here like this. And after we feed it through there, we're gonna install it back into this bracket, just like that. And then put our knob back on, the tensioner. And we're just gonna start it, not go too far because we wanna, you know, have it as loose as possible. And so this bracket here is gonna go right around the channel here, just like that. And it's gonna line up with some threads on this side. And if we flip it around, there's a hole here with threads also on the other end. And you don't want to tighten this very hard, guys, just ever so slightly. I mean, because it's plastic, so, you know, if you tighten it too hard, you'll warp it. So just snug, since there's 2 of them on each side, it should be plenty. But yeah, simple as that. We got our adjuster on here. So now we can go ahead and connect the belt. So let's grab this one end. And if you guys can see on the hot end, there's 2 notches. And this is where the belt's gonna go. So it literally slides in from the side. Hopefully you guys can see that. But yeah, just like that, it just slides in there. And the other end slides into the other one. So yeah, pretty simple. Just make sure your belts are lining up to the center of the channel, and that looks really good right there. And now we can tighten this up a bit, so we can tighten the belt, and it's actually already pretty close to being tight. And be very careful with over tightening this, because it's so easy to over tighten it. Feel the belt, make sure, you know. And mine's already pretty good, and I just tightened it a bit. So with the belts, you want to be looser than tighter, so yeah, keep that in mind. All right, and so for our last part here, we just need to install this switch box here that literally just sits right there, and these are our 2 little bolts that will hold it. So yeah guys, as you can see, it's not too bad, and honestly, if you enjoy putting things together, this will be pretty fun for you. Plus you get to kind of, you know, learn the printer a little bit, how it works. But yeah, that's on and it's tight, and our switch is there, and so if we go with the hot end, we can see it switching. All right, so if you got this far, you're doing good, because this is probably the hardest part of the whole assembly. So let's go ahead and go to step 6. So for step 6, we're gonna roll the X-axis assembly that we built here onto the printer. All right, so again, making sure that you're not tangled with all your wires back there and they're happy where they wanna be. So if you have to, you know, untangle them, but you know, mine are good right there. So yeah, for the next part, we're just gonna literally grab it like this and set it over onto the channels. And the little wheels are going to kind of roll on there. So yeah, just like that. Now on the back side, flip it around here, the lead screw needs to line up in this brass bushing right here. So we're gonna kind of line it up, and then we're gonna turn it, bring it down. So, and you guys can see it just literally rolls right down. And it's very smooth here. I can probably even push it with my hand, yeah, so. Now, if I forget to mention this later in the video, you do need to put some kind of grease on here to help it travel a little better and not wear out that brass bushing. So any kind of grease or oil will do. And if you don't have anything, even cooking oil will work too. So, but yeah, this is, you know, pretty simple here, and it just walks right on. Now in the manual, it's talking about adjusting the tightness of the belts, which we'll actually do a little bit later when we adjust everything and check the whole printer. So for step 7, we're going to be actually installing the top frame piece and also the screen on the side of the printer. So let's start with the top. Grab this last channel. Again guys, be careful when you take this off not to cut yourself on these corners. So on this channel here, it's pretty simple. We got 4 holes, and one side looks like this and the other side is wallowed out. So the wallowed out part goes up like this. So literally just like this is how it sits on the printer. So there's a baggie of M525 bolts, and we're going to need 4 of them, but it does come with an extra one. And those literally are going to go right up here into this channel here. And we'll grab our wrench and run them down. So we're not tightening anything, we're just running them down for now. And if you guys remember, we haven't tightened any of the channels underneath either. So this is good because now we can space out the distance here evenly with our assembly. So what we want to do is raise this up all the way it goes, and so that's given us the correct distance between these 2 channels. So now that we know that's good, now we can go ahead and tighten the bolts on the top, because we know it's good here, and we do want to snug these up reasonably well. All right, for the next part, we need to go back down, and it goes down pretty easily. So we're going to go down as much as we can, and then we're going to go underneath the printer and tighten those bolts, because now we have the right spacing on the bottom because our X-axis is all the way down. And so this will give us a very accurate travel distance from the bottom to the top without any kind of binding or, you know, getting smaller here and larger there or the other way around. And, you know, that will cause print issues too. So yeah, now we're just going to tighten the bottom up. And you want to be pretty generous with the tightness here. Obviously nothing crazy, but you know, this is the only thing that's holding our whole gantry up, our upper portion. So we want it to be, you know, pretty stiff. Now we'll go to this side. All right, and now we're done with our frame. So another thing to note, once you build the whole frame, there is a possibility that you could fall out of a level again. That happens sometimes. So mine is good here, but you know, if you do need to go back and loosen these bolts on the side and flatten it out, this is a good time to do that. So we do need to install the screen next, and it comprises of 2 pieces, the screen itself and the bracket it connects to. So the bracket itself has the hardware already connected, and you guys can see they're T-nuts. So the first thing we need to do is loosen all these bolts so the T-nuts can spin around. And so what we're going to do is we're going to line them up with the channel. And once they line up, then we're going to tighten them, and they're going to turn into the channel and lock in, you guys can see. And the way they turn is kind of tricky. but there's no easy way to, I guess, explain this. But yeah, you first line them up so they can all fall into the channel. As you guys can see, they all fell in. And so then you're gonna kind of hold it where it's in between, you know, not like all the way down or all the way up or to the side. You kind of have to give it some air or freedom, I guess, to spin around. And so then what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna unscrew the bolt and then start screwing it back on or back in, and that's going to tighten it. And so one of them grabbed, and we're going to do the same thing for the other ones. Unscrew it and then screw it back in. It should turn and grab. So because there's 4 of them, you know, some of them will grab for sure. But yeah, just the idea here is to unscrew it and then screw it back on, and the T-nut actually turns into the channel and locks itself in. And it's quite important that the bracket is lined up, you know, pretty straight with the grooves. If it's not going to work. So the bracket's on. Now we can go ahead and clip the screen on here. But before we do, let's go ahead and plug it in. So we got this wire coming out the front. There's a socket here that plugs into, just like that. And we can also see here a speaker for noise making. So yeah, now we're just gonna set it down onto the bracket. Just watch out for that wire underneath. And then we're just gonna clip it on like that. So yeah, it's on. Very cool. So yeah, that wasn't very hard. And now we have the screen on. All right, so we're getting close, guys. So for the next part, we're gonna install the spool holder, the end covers for the channels, and also plug in our PTFE tubing. So while we're over here, let's go ahead and do the PTFE tubing. So this is quite simple. This is the tube here, and we're just simply gonna just insert it, just like that. Now you wanna go, you know, as far in, and then there is a little black part here that kind of holds it in there, or it's like a locker. But a lot of times these PTFE tubings will move around with retraction, and this one does have a little bit of play in it. So we might have to print out a little clip that holds the coupler from moving around. So keep that in mind. And also, if this coupler here is not working out for you, you do have an extra one that might work better. So keep that in mind also. But yeah, simple as that. The tube is on, and then our wiring just kind of will go back, and there's a little clip behind here that the wiring does clip onto. So let's go to the top where we're going to have to install this spool holder. So, you know, if we're looking at the front of the printer, our spool holder needs to be on the left side, so as close as possible that way. So with a nice flat face going to the front, our spool itself is going to go to the back, so we're going to install it here, and then the locking nut will go to the front, and then we're just going to turn it and it's going to lock it in. So yeah, simple as that. But we do need a couple T-nuts and bolts, which were in the spare packet. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the bolt through and then screw the T-nut on, so facing this way on both of them. So yeah, just like that, guys. You can go ahead and insert it into the top channel here, so the T-nuts will line up and fall in. And again, guys, yeah, we got the same concept here. We're going to undo the bolt and then tighten it back in, and that should turn it and lock it in. And sure enough, this one locked in. Now we just got to do the other. And you guys can see that it's facing towards the back. And the reason for that is because whenever you put your spool on here, your filament will feed into the extruder right here. All right, so for the end caps, which are in their separate baggie, you're going to install them right here on each end. And they simply just push on. And if they don't go too easy on, you can tap them with something, and that'll make them go in all the way. And same thing for this side. I'm gonna need to tap this one too. And there we go. So now these corners are not sharp, so if you bring your hand around here, you're not gonna cut yourself. I like how they thought through that. All right, guys, so we are on our last step, which is connecting all of the wiring. And this is actually quite simple because most of our connections are right here on this side of the printer. And you guys can see where I put this wire through here. There's a little clamp that holds it. So all of our wires are labeled, and it's quite easy to figure out where they go. And if you guys notice, some of them are a little bigger and smaller. So the bigger ones are for motors and the smaller ones are for end stop switch. So here we have a big one that says E, and that's going to be the extruder, this motor here. So let's plug that in. All right, here we have another big one that says X on it, and that's going to be the X motor. So that goes under there. Plug it in. Going here to the bottom, we have another motor, and that's going to be the Z motor, and there's a little Z on this plug. So make sure this Z cable here is not going up where it's going to catch on the bed and going back and forth. So that's pretty much everything here. Let's flip it around. We've got 2 more plugs to plug in. We have this X-axis end stop switch wire, which is here, and there's a little X on it. And this is the smaller plug. And then we have another plug here with the Z-axis end stop switch. And there's a Z on this one. Maybe you guys can see that. It's gonna plug right there. So yeah, that is everything to plug in, I believe. and it's quite amazing that we're pretty much done. Now we're not, you know, done because we still need to check a few things, and that's going to be our belts and our rollers. We did the bed rollers already earlier, as you guys saw, and the reason we did that is because it's a little, well, actually it's not too hard to get. Yeah, so I guess it doesn't really matter. You can't do it afterwards. It does come out right here where you can get to it quite easy. So if you haven't adjusted your bed yet, go ahead and do that now, or if you need to maybe readjust it, you can. Also, you want to check your belts and check the tightness of them. So here we can adjust it to be tighter or looser. Again, on this stuff, you want it to be looser than tighter, meaning like if you can play a note on these belts, you're too tight. So if you're too tight, loosening them, but if you're too loose, tighten them up a bit. But be careful because, you know, you can't feel how much tightness you have on this kind of adjustment. So you really need to kind of, you know, pull on it and feel it. So that feels pretty good here. And you can experiment this as you print. You can loosen them and tighten them and see how it, you know, affects your print quality. Same thing for the x-axis. We've already adjusted it. We can adjust it here. So we're pretty good here. Now, one thing we haven't done is adjusted the wheels on the hot end. So let's flip it around. And here you guys can see we got 2 stationaries on the top and 1 adjustable on the bottom. And believe it or not, guys, mine is adjusted perfectly. So yeah, it's really good. So I'm able to spin this pretty freely, and there's no funny kind of anything going on while I'm moving around. It's very smooth. So if you're too tight and you can't spin these rollers, or they're really hard to spin, that means you need to loosen it. And if you feel any kind of bumpiness or grabbiness, that means you're probably too tight again. Now, if you're too loose, you know, this is going to move around, and that's also very bad too. So it needs to be tight enough where it doesn't wobble. And the adjustable wheel is down here, and you're going to use this wrench here to tighten and loosen it. So, all right, well, that pretty much concludes the assembly. We can now go ahead and put this bed back on. And you don't want to take off the sticker until you're ready, because you want to keep it as clean as possible and not get any kind of grease or anything on it. So yeah, slide it on there, put our clips on, 1 in the front and 1 in the back, and we are officially finished with the assembly.